Hi, my name is April Hobbs. I am the Adult Services Librarian here at St. Paul's Hollywood Branch, and today I'm going to talk to you about some Irish authors you should know about. Now, these authors, we have multiple materials of theirs in our system, and I'm going to talk to you about the authors like Oscar Wilde all the way through to more contemporary Irish authors as well. Now, the first one, Oscar Wilde, you've probably heard about him. His most famous work is The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is about a man who sells his soul for eternal youth and beauty. Now, you probably read this one in high school. I know I did. I thought it was a wild ride when I read it in high school. It talks a lot about morals and everything like that. And it was an interesting moral story at the time it was published, as a lot of the moral dilemmas in the story were very scandalous at the time. And I also remember watching a play about this story when I went to Ireland back in 2012. And it was just, I was really enthralled with the story, as I did when I read it in high school. So, a classic that you should definitely read is Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and any of his other works as well. Our next author is James Joyce. If you haven't heard of James Joyce, he's from the Irish literary revival of the early 20th century, and he wrote such novels called Ulysses, which is his most famous work, and it's loosely based on the Odyssey, but it follows ordinary Dubliners in 1904. And it was a major achievement in 20th century literature, as it included interior monologues, earthy humor, and Celtic lyricism and vulgarity. Now, the one I have here is James Joyce's Dubliners. And it's an image of a moving city with 15 stories of ordinary people experiencing the realities of life in Dublin. So, it also incorporates a lot of realism. So, James Joyce has always been very good about incorporating realism in his works. And this is definitely an author you should check out from the early Irish literary revival of the early 20th century. Next, we're going to talk about another famous poet. It's actually W.B. Yeats. You've probably heard of him. He is a famous Irish poet from the early 20th century. He did a lot of poetry that was included for traditional Irish folklore and Celtic imagery as well. Right here we have actually a young adult book. It's called W.B. Yeats, A Romantic Visionary, and it is an anthology of some of his greatest works and are accompanied by many beautiful works of art, which include some by his brother Jack. Now, my favorite poems by W.B. Yeats that's included into this anthology is The Wild Swans at Coole and Coole Park. Now, Coole Park is actually a nature reserve in County Galway, Ireland, and it was once the home of Lady Gregory, who was one of the most important people of the Irish literary revival of the early 20th century. Actually, Lady Gregory transformed Coole Park into a focal point for the literary scene at the time. So a lot of authors and writers at that time would go to Coole Park and have inspiration and talk and everything at that time. And another cool thing about Lady Gregory, who owned Coole Park, she actually co-founded the Abbey Theatre in Dublin with W.B. Yeats. So another really cool tidbit about Coole Park and the poems that W.B. Yeats wrote with that. Another anthology of Yeats that we have in our collection is for adults. It's a Yeats Poetry, Drama, and Prose, and it includes a comprehensive collection of Yeats's major writings spanning his entire career. And it also includes critical responses to Yeats's work by contemporaries such as Oscar Wilde, Ezra Pound, and T.S. Eliot. So one of my favorites in this one is Under Ben Bulben. And if you've watched any of the Tales and Travels videos we've done, I actually talked a little bit about Ben Bulben, which is actually in County Sligo in Ireland. And it's a famous landmark known as County Sligo's Table Mountain. And it's known for its connection to Yeats and to multiple legends and myths. So Yeats incorporates a lot of myths and legends into his poetry. So highly recommend checking out Yeats's poetry. All right, we're moving on to contemporary authors. Now, if you're like me, you probably have seen the movie P.S. I Love You. It has Hilary Swank and Gerard Butler. Did you know that it's actually based on a book by Cecilia Ahern? Now, Cecilia Ahern, she has multiple books in her system. There's actually a sequel to P.S. I Love You as well. And so if you've ever watched the movie or read the book, you know that the character Holly is recently widowed at 30. and she lost her husband due to a terminal illness, and then she starts getting letters that he had arranged for her before his death and everything, and she starts to like, starts to feel alive again after his death because she was really sad at the time. And it's just a really beautiful book, really beautiful love story, and it'll make you cry. It made me cry. It's fine. So make sure you check out Cecilia Ahern. She's great. She's great. That's from our contemporary authors. Now, our next contemporary author is actually, this is her debut novel. It's Joyce, her novel Exciting Times. Now, this is her debut novel, and it's about an Irish expat named Ava who lives in Hong Kong and becomes entangled in a love triangle between a male banker and a female lawyer. Now, Ava is just exploring who she wants to be and how she wants to live her life. But this is Joyce Dolan's debut novel, and she has a couple other novels out that are really good as well, so I highly recommend checking her out. This is more of a funny one, I feel like, and I've really enjoyed reading it. So we're going to talk about Sally Rooney and her novel Normal People. As you might know, it was turned into a Hulu series within last year. It was a really good Hulu series. I mean, it pretty much follows closely by the book. I mean, there's some different changes from the, TV show versus the book, but the book's really good too. So it talks a lot about like mental health and toxic relationships and stuff like that. And then she has another novel that you've probably heard about, which is called Conversations with Friends. So she has a bunch of other materials that we have in our system. So I highly recommend checking out Sally Rooney because her writing style is really interesting. Now we're going to move on to Colin Toybin, who wrote Brooklyn. Now, Brooklyn, you've probably heard about the movie back in 2015, 2016. It had Saoirse Ronan, the actress, in it. And Brooklyn is set in 1950s Ireland and Brooklyn, New York, when a young woman named Alice leaves her mother and sister in Ireland and comes to Brooklyn to start a new life. She finds work in a department store and eventually finds love with an Italian named Tony. And just as things start to look up for her, she gets news from her hometown in Ireland, and that forces her to choose between two countries and two men. So, but yeah, it's a really good novel. Highly recommend it. If you like the movie, you'll like the novel as well. Now we're going to move on to another author that you've probably heard about. She released a novel last year called The Searchers, or The Searcher. And her name is Tana French. Now, Tana French has multiple materials within our library system that you've probably seen or heard about, and I highly recommend checking her out because she has some really good novels. So The Searcher, if you haven't heard about it, it's about a retired detective named Cat who moves to a remote village in rural Ireland. He plans to fix up an old cottage, enjoy the mountains and his retirement from the everyday police work he did. But this does not go to plan, as he is asked by a local boy to help find his missing brother, as no one in the village seems to care that the brother is missing. And so Cat has to figure this out because he still has that itch to solve cases. And Tana French has really good like mysteries and thrillers and stuff like that. This is another one that we have in our system called The Witch Elm by Tana French. And so she's just a relatively really good contemporary author who incorporates Ireland into her many thrillers and mystery novels. And her novels have a lot of dark themes, and her writing is very realistic as well. So highly recommend her if you like mysteries and thrillers. So I hope you enjoyed learning about some Irish authors and some of the many materials that we have in our library that are written by some of these Irish authors. There's a lot more within our system, but these are just a select few from early to more contemporary Irish authors. And I really hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope you check them out. So thank you.